It was past midnight when Jay finally left the office, exhausted after a long day that stretched into night. The city lights faded behind him as he merged onto the old interstate, the one that cut through miles of forest and empty land before leading back home. The highway was strangely quiet that night, no headlights in front or behind, no passing cars, not even the hum of life on the roadside. Just the soft sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Jay rolled down his window slightly, hoping the cool air would help keep him awake. The dashboard clock blinked 12:47 a.m. as he passed a metal sign that read, "Exit in 2 miles." He noted it, half aware, planning to take that exit if he felt too tired to drive much longer. But after what felt like at least 10 minutes of driving, he saw the exact same sign again, "Exit in 2 miles." The shape, the font, the scratch on the bottom right corner, it was identical. Jay blinked and sat up straighter, eyes scanning the road. Had he missed the exit? No, that wasn't possible. He would have seen it. He kept driving, the road stretching out endlessly ahead of him, flanked on both sides by thick trees. A faint fog had begun to gather, low and creeping, and the sky above was pitch black, with no stars in sight. A few minutes later, the same sign appeared once more. "Exit in 2 miles." It was impossible. Jay's fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, and his foot eased off the gas slightly. A cold feeling crept into his chest, the kind that wasn't caused by the night air. It felt like the world around him had stopped moving forward. Everything looked the same. The same bent guardrail, the same tree leaning at a strange angle, the same dark curve in the road. It was like being trapped inside a loop, one that played over and over again while the rest of the world slept. Jay glanced at his phone, hoping to check his GPS, but it showed only a spinning circle, no location, no route, just a blank screen. Even the time hadn't changed much. It was 12:49 a.m. That didn't make sense. He had been driving longer than 2 minutes. Something was wrong with this road, something that logic couldn't explain. He turned the radio on, trying to calm his nerves, but it only gave him static. He turned it off again quickly, his eyes returned to the road ahead, heart beating faster. The trees seemed to lean closer now, the darkness between them thicker, deeper. He didn't know where he was or how to leave, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a highway anymore, it was something else entirely, something watching, something waiting. Jay gripped the steering wheel harder, his knuckles turning white as he tried to focus on the road. The eerie stillness of the highway stretched out before him like an endless void, and his thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something creeping up behind him. The road remained empty, but the feeling that something was wrong, that something had been wrong all along, gnawed at him. It wasn't just the endless repetition of the same sign, or the strange fog that seemed to settle in the trees. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. His mind needed a distraction, a way to pull away from the growing tension suffocating him in the car. Without thinking, Jay reached out and turned the radio dial, hoping to hear something familiar, something to push away the creeping sense of dread. At first, nothing but static filled the air. The sound was low and crackling, like the whispers of a distant storm. Jay frowned and twisted the knob again, trying to tune into a station. The static only grew louder, more intense, until it became almost unbearable. And then, just as Jay was about to turn it off, a soft, distant voice cut through the noise. It wasn't clear at first, but it sounded close, too close. "Don't stop the car." The words were barely audible, almost like a breath against the microphone, but Jay heard them clearly. His pulse quickened. His hand froze on the dial, but the voice continued, soft yet undeniably present. He couldn't make out the rest of the words at first. It was as if the voice was speaking in a language half understood, slipping in and out of his consciousness. Was he imagining this? Maybe the fatigue from his long day was playing tricks on him. He glanced at the radio, his mind racing, but the dial hadn't moved. Still, the voice came again, clear as day. "If you stop, you'll never leave." A chill ran down his spine. That wasn't a mistake. He wasn't imagining it. Someone or something was speaking to him from the radio. The words, cryptic and unsettling, lodged themselves into his thoughts. His grip on the wheel tightened, and he instinctively checked the rearview mirror again. There was nothing behind him, just darkness. But that didn't comfort him. The highway stretched endlessly, yet he felt more trapped than ever. His heart thudded in his chest, his breath shallow and quick. His fingers shook as he tried to adjust the radio. Desperate for a normal sound, something to cancel out the whispers. He twisted the knob again, but nothing happened. The whispers only grew louder, more distinct now, overlapping with the faint sound of static. He could hear the voice clearer, almost as if it was speaking directly into his ear. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the voice came again, this time with a sharpness that sent a jolt through his body. "You have to keep going. Don't stop." Jay's pulse hammered in his ears. Was it a prank? Was someone messing with him? The fear in his chest told him it was something much worse. The road seemed to close in around him, the darkness creeping closer, the trees pressing tighter against the sides. There was no escape, and yet every instinct told him he had to keep driving, because if he stopped, he might never leave. The road stretched on, dark and endless, as Jay's mind raced to make sense of what was happening. His breath was shallow, each inhale sharp as though the air itself had turned thick with fear. The radio had gone silent, the whispers replaced by nothing but static. The trees on either side of the highway had started to blur together, forming dark shapes that seemed to move in the corner of his vision. The silence around him pressed in, broken only by the hum of his car's engine and the occasional snap of a branch from somewhere deep in the woods. It felt as though he was no longer driving down a highway but drifting through a world that didn't quite belong to reality. Jay's heart raced, and he found himself glancing nervously at the side of the road, wondering if his mind had started playing tricks on him. That's when he saw her. A figure appeared ahead, standing by the side of the road, completely still. At first, Jay thought it was another illusion, a figment of his overstressed mind. But as he drew closer, the figure became clearer. She was a woman, dressed in a long, white gown that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Her hair was dark, flowing loosely around her shoulders, and she stood facing away from him, her body perfectly still. Jay's stomach dropped. There was something wrong about her, something too still, too perfect. He could see her silhouette against the blackness, and for a moment he considered just driving past her, keeping his eyes on the road. But as his headlights swept over her, she turned slowly, unnervingly slow, until her eyes met his. Her smile was the first thing Jay noticed. It stretched unnaturally wide, too wide, the corners of her mouth pulled back so far that it seemed to reach past the edges of her face. Her teeth, sharp and gleaming white, were too many, too pointed, like something out of a nightmare. But it wasn't just her smile that made Jay's skin crawl. Her eyes, those dark, empty eyes, seemed to see right through him, and for a second, he felt the cold, piercing gaze that made his whole body shudder. Something wasn't right about this woman. She wasn't real. Panic surged through him, and without thinking, Jay slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, pushing the car forward with a rush of speed. His pulse pounded in his ears, and his hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the woman fading into the distance, but to his horror, she wasn't gone. She was still there, standing in the middle of the road now, her body facing him, her twisted smile still wide and unnatural. Jay swerved, barely missing her, the tires screeching as he fought to keep control of the car. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car rocketing down the highway, and as the trees blurred around him, he dared not look back. But when Jay finally allowed himself to glance in the rearview mirror again, the woman was gone. There was nothing behind him but darkness. No sign of her, no trace of her twisted smile. The highway, once again, was silent. It felt like he had narrowly escaped something terrible, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. He didn't feel safe, and the feeling that he was being hunted, followed, only grew stronger as he drove deeper into the night. Jay's hands gripped the wheel tightly as he sped down the highway, the distant echo of the woman's twisted smile still fresh in his mind. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his nerves were raw. The highway seemed never-ending, the trees pressing closer with each passing mile, as if they were closing in on him. The silence of the road felt oppressive, each moment stretching longer than the last. Just when Jay thought he couldn't drive any further, a dim light flickered on the horizon ahead. At first he thought it was a mirage, but as he drew closer, the shape of a gas station emerged through the fog. Relief washed over him for the briefest moment. He hadn't seen another sign of life for miles, and the thought of stopping, even just for a moment, felt like a small escape from the growing terror in his chest. The gas station sign was old, rusted, the letters barely visible under layers of grime. The flickering light came from a neon sign that buzzed intermittently, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot, which appeared empty and still. Jay pulled in without hesitation, desperate for any sense of normalcy. He needed fuel, needed to clear his head, and above all, needed to find anyone who could explain why everything around him felt wrong. As he parked his car and stepped out, a strange, heavy silence hung in the air. The only sound came from the occasional creak of the sign as it swung gently in the wind. No other cars, no people. Just a stillness that felt unsettling. The gas pumps stood unmoving, their nozzles hanging limp, unused. The dim light from the station sign barely illuminated the area, and the shadows seemed unnaturally thick, even under the buzzing neon. Jay made his way to the door of the small station, his footsteps echoing in the dead quiet. The bell above the door didn't ring when he entered, which struck him as odd. He had always heard the doorbell in every gas station he'd ever been to. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something else, something sour, almost metallic. The shelves lined with goods were empty, most of the products long expired. Behind the counter stood an old man, his face pale and expressionless. His clothes were old-fashioned, as if he hadn't changed them in years. He didn't move as Jay walked in, didn't greet him, didn't even blink. Jay felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the man's unmoving presence felt wrong. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the growing unease. Excuse me," Jay said, his voice sounding strangely distant in the dead air. "I've been driving for a while. Is there a way off this highway? I feel like I'm stuck in some kind of loop." The old man's head raised slowly, his eyes locking onto Jay's with an unsettling intensity. His voice, when it came, was a low rasp. "You shouldn't have left the road," he muttered, as if Jay had already known the answer. Then, without another word, the old man lowered his head again, returning to his still, lifeless position. Jay's breath hitched in his throat. A cold wave of dread washed over him. Something was terribly wrong here. With his heart racing, Jay spun around and bolted for the door, but as he looked back one last time, the gas station was gone. In its place, only the thick, oppressive darkness of the highway remained. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. There was no gas station, no man, no sign of the building. Only the road, empty and silent. His mind spun with confusion and terror, and as he got back into his car and slammed the door shut, the only thought that repeated in his mind was that he had to keep driving. There was no turning back now. The car sped down the highway, the road ahead still stretching endlessly into the thick, oppressive darkness. Jay's grip on the wheel had tightened to the point where his fingers ached, and his mind raced, desperately trying to process everything that had happened. The gas station, the old man, the disappearance. It didn't make sense. His head spun as he tried to shake off the thoughts, but they clung to him like the fog that now surrounded the car. It was as though the road itself had become a maze, each turn leading him deeper into the unknown. He glanced at the dashboard again. The time seemed stuck at 1:13 a.m., the minutes refusing to pass, the world around him frozen in some kind of eternal pause. The only sound was the soft hum of the tires on asphalt and the rhythmic beat of his heart in his chest. Just when Jay thought things couldn't get any worse, a faint light appeared in the distance. At first, it was barely visible, just a soft glow through the thick fog. But as he got closer, the shape of a bridge began to emerge. It looked old, weathered by time, with iron railings that seemed to have been rusted by years of neglect. The bridge arched over a dark river, its waters barely visible beneath the mist that clung to the surface. For a brief moment, Jay felt a glimmer of hope. A bridge meant progress, a way out. He had to cross it to escape the madness that had taken hold of this road. But as he neared the entrance to the bridge, something felt off. The bridge wasn't just old. It felt like it was decaying, as if the weight of the years had begun to pull it apart. The planks beneath the car creaked with every movement, and Jay's stomach twisted in unease. Still, he pressed on, the car inching forward, the headlights barely cutting through the fog. As the car crossed the halfway point, the engine sputtered, a strange grinding noise coming from under the hood. Jay's heart skipped a beat, and he slammed his foot on the accelerator, desperate to get to the other side. But the car didn't respond. Instead, it slowed, as if the bridge itself was pulling the car down into the darkness below. Panic set in, and Jay could feel his breath growing shallow. The fog around him thickened and the shadows deepened, twisting into shapes that seemed to shift and move, as though the night itself was alive. He gripped the steering wheel harder, trying to force the car forward, but it felt as if the bridge was fighting him, holding him in place, trapping him in its grip. His pulse quickened and sweat trickled down his brow. Just as he thought he was going to lose control, the car lurched forward, jerking violently, as if something had released its hold on him. Jay slammed on the brakes, his eyes wide as he looked around. The bridge should have led to somewhere, to something, yet in front of him was nothing but more darkness. The fog had swallowed everything. There was no end to the bridge, no sign of the land beyond. It had led him nowhere. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized the truth. The bridge wasn't just a passage, it was part of the road that would never end. He was trapped. The highway, the fog, the endless loop, it was all a part of something far worse than he had ever imagined. The bridge had been a lie, a false hope designed to keep him on the road, to keep him from escaping. And now, as the fog thickened and the shadows deepened around him, Jay understood. There was no way out. The car sat motionless on the bridge, its engine stuttering in the stillness, as Jay's hands trembled on the wheel. The fog wrapped around the vehicle like a living thing, thick and suffocating, pressing in from all sides. There was no sound, no movement, just an eerie silence that seemed to drown out everything. The road ahead had disappeared into the void, swallowed by the darkness, and the bridge behind him now felt like an abandoned relic, a place lost to time. Jay's mind raced, struggling to grasp what was happening. How had he ended up here? What kind of nightmare was this? He turned to look at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman from before, or the old man, but the mirror reflected nothing but the dense fog creeping in from all directions. He felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to keep driving, but something told him that the road ahead held more dangers than anything he had already encountered. And yet there was no turning back. The fog seemed to trap him, confining him to the bridge as if it had become the only place left in the world. Then, just as he was about to drive forward again, something strange caught his eye. At first, it was a faint movement in the fog, just a shadow passing by, but then the shadows grew clearer, more distinct. Faces began to appear in the mist. Dozens of them, their features twisted and distorted by the thick fog. They floated in the air, hovering just beyond the reach of the headlights, their eyes wide, their mouths open in silent screams. Jay froze, his heart pounding as he stared at them. Their faces were familiar, yet foreign, like images from a dream he couldn't fully remember. Some were blurry, like half-formed memories, while others were so vivid that he could almost recognize them. The fog seemed to shift around them, twisting and curling as the faces moved closer, their gazes fixed on him, his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't look away, even as the faces grew more defined, more real. It was as if they were trapped in the fog, just like him, forever suspended between the living world and some dark, unseen place. Jay's pulse raced as the faces closed in, the air growing colder with each passing moment. He could feel their eyes boring into him, and a sense of deep, unshakable dread settled over him. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator, desperate to escape, but the car didn't respond. The engine sputtered again, and the headlights flickered, casting erratic shadows that made the faces appear even more grotesque. The faces in the fog began to distort, their mouths now twisted into cruel, mocking grins, their eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. He could almost hear their whispers in the distance, faint and incomprehensible, like 1,000 voices crying out for help. As the fog pressed closer, the temperature in the car dropped sharply, and Jay's breath misted in the air. The faces seemed to follow him, drawing nearer with each passing second, as if they were pushing him to the brink of madness. In a frantic attempt to escape, Jay tried the car again, turning the key with shaking hands, but nothing happened. The engine was dead. Panic surged through him, his mind racing as the fog continued to close in, the faces now inches away from the windows. Their gazes locked onto his, unblinking, their forms becoming more and more grotesque. The fear that had been building inside him exploded in that moment, and Jay realized there was no way out. The road had brought him here, and now it was taking him somewhere darker, somewhere he could never leave. As the faces pressed against the glass, their distorted smiles growing wider, Jay knew with absolute certainty that he had become part of the nightmare. There was no escape. The fog had claimed him. The faces in the fog grew more oppressive with every passing second, their hollow eyes now completely locked onto Jay, as though they could see straight into his soul. His pulse raced, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, but there was no escape. The car wouldn't start, the engine lifeless, mocking him with its silence. The fog pressed in, thickening around the vehicle, blurring his vision until all he could see was the suffocating white mist. The temperature had dropped drastically, and he could see his breath fogging in front of him. It was as though the very air itself had turned against him. The faces pressed closer to the windows, their features grotesque and distorted, each one a twisted reflection of something Jay couldn't quite place. Some were familiar, as if from his past, but others were strange, alien, and filled with a sorrowful anger that seemed to call out to him. The whispers grew louder, though their words remained unintelligible, like distant voices trapped in a place beyond his understanding. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Jay's thoughts were no longer his own, overwhelmed by the realization that he was caught in a nightmare that wouldn't end. The fog was no longer just a physical barrier. It was alive, pressing against him, trapping him in a place he couldn't escape. The road, once a means of freedom, now felt like a prison, an endless expanse that stretched on forever, offering no way out. Panic gripped him as the faces continued to surround the car, their mouths moving in slow, mocking gestures. He wanted to scream, to break free, but the fear was too much, paralyzing him. Then, as though in answer to his terror, the fog shifted once again. A figure appeared in the distance, faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing second. Jay's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the form. It was a woman. Her hair was dark and wild, her clothes torn, and her face covered with a veil of mist. She moved toward him, her footsteps eerily silent against the road. Jay's breath caught in his throat as she grew closer. There was something about her, something familiar yet impossibly wrong. Her eyes were hidden behind the veil of mist, but he could feel her gaze burning through it, locking onto him with an intensity that chilled him to the core. Before he could react, the woman's form shifted. Her face, once obscured, now appeared clearly in front of him, her eyes dark and hollow, her mouth twisted into a wicked grin. The figure reached toward the car, her hand moving in slow, deliberate motions. Jay could feel the pressure building inside him, a suffocating weight as though the very air was thick with dread. Her fingers brushed the window, and for the briefest moment, Jay saw something he hadn't noticed before, a reflection. It wasn't his own face staring back at him. The face in the reflection was pale, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, a twisted version of himself, staring back with a vacant expression. In that instant, the truth hit him. The road he had been driving down, the highway, wasn't leading anywhere. It never had. It was a loop, an endless cycle, and he had been driving in circles all along. The faces, the woman, the fog, everything was part of a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He had become a part of the road, a lost soul trapped in a place where time no longer mattered, where the past and present had collided, and he could never escape. The woman's smile widened, and Jay's heart sank as he realized the truth. There was no escape. The highway had claimed him, just as it had claimed countless others before him. The road stretched on forever, and Jay was now just another lost soul, trapped in the endless loop, with no beginning, no end, only the road ahead.